The first two episodes of Skeleton Crew premiered last night. In general, I think it's off to a pretty decent start. It absolutely captures some of the childlike fun of Star Wars with the kid characters. There are still some aesthetic things about the series that give me pause, but more and more I'm thinking that's the point. The kids' homeworld is supposed to feel a little strange, and I like the mystery surrounding it. I'm not blown away yet, but I'm enjoying the vibe and the tone, so let's get into the premiere scene by scene. I liked the mini crawl at the start, even if it is kind of basic. I think it's smart to fill in the more casual audience about when and where this story takes place within the New Republic era. But the following pirate attack really surprised me. First of all, those docking harpoons are sick. They remind me of something the Nile would use from the High Republic books. The fact that we then follow it up by a pretty brutal, although not graphic, assault was unexpected. Creators John Watts and Christopher Ford have insisted that while this series stars kids, it is not a kids show. I absolutely think they want the show to be accessible to younger fans. I think they're adhering to a PG rating, just like the first 5 Star Wars films, but it doesn't necessarily feel like they're going out of their way to avoid violence. Seeing an alien get shot in the eye is pretty intense, but I also love that they keep on fighting because that's not where their brain is. I like that kind of thing. We soon meet Captain Silvo, who just, right away, that's gotta be Jude Law, right? They're keeping him masked and distorting his voice a bit, but this opening scene feels like a good setup for his character. A pirate leader who fails to provide for his crew, so they mutiny. It reminds me of Jack Sparrow, losing the Black Pearl to a rival, beginning his quest to reclaim his ship while stringing along Will in the process. I think it was smart to show even a little bit of edge and danger at the start with all these pirates, because the rest of the episode is all about the kids. Everything is much more lighthearted, which makes complete sense, but we also know the kind of danger they will be headed into. We first meet Wim and his father Wendell, who seem to have a normal enough relationship. We find out later that Wim's mother has probably passed away. Wendell seems like a good but busy father who cares for Wim, but just has a lot going on at work. The situation and the setting on At Aden, it does still feel a little too familiar from my Star Wars taste. Aesthetically, it's not what I expect when I think of Star Wars, but I'm getting over it because it sounds like it is a purposeful story choice. But I'll talk about that more when we get into the second episode. I was also able to just set those nitpicks aside because I like Wim and Neil's friendship a lot. Having pretend lightsaber fights at the bus stop is exactly what I did as a kid. My friend Chris and I would play pretend and talk about the latest Star Wars book we were reading together. I associate my young Star Wars fandom very strongly with waiting for the bus, so I think Skeleton Crew is doing a great job at capturing the childlike wonder Star Wars can deliver. It's interesting that the kids are playing pretend and playing with Star Wars action figures within Star Wars, but I get the sense that this would basically be like pretending to be a Knight of the Round Table. I think At Aten has stories about the Jedi, but they've probably faded into myth and fantasy. They're only read about in storybooks anymore. I'll talk about why again in the second episode when we learn more. For now, they just serve to set Wim up like Luke Skywalker, always looking off in the distance, imagining being somewhere else, and never keeping his mind in the present, which is why he's shocked to hear that the career assessment test is the next day, an important exam that Undersecretary Farah claims will contribute to the great work of keeping the Republic peaceful and strong. And it sure is interesting that she doesn't say the New Republic. This is our first clue that something isn't quite right here. It's also interesting that we only see a handful of species on the planet, helping to show how isolated this world is from the rest of the galaxy. Neil gets worried Wim will be held back and briefly offers to intentionally fail the test so they can be held back together and stay in the same class. I think Neil gives off big sidekick energy, willing to consider hurting his future for Wim's sake when he knows what he really wants is to stay in the same class as Runa, the girl he has a crush on. Later, he points out that Wim doesn't show much interest in how his day went and settles for the bare minimum of effort. Wim gets to have the call sign Jedi 1, and Neil has to be Jedi 2. I see an imbalance in their friendship and selfishness in Wim. I hope over the course of the series they find a better equilibrium with Wim becoming a better friend and Neil gaining some self-confidence and self-respect. Meanwhile, we also meet Fern and KB, who have a somewhat similar dynamic. Fern is a daredevil, pushing her hoverbike to the limits and putting KB in danger in the process, which then breaks her hoverbike, which she needs for a race against the classic school jerk. So Fern likes to pick fights and act tough in the face of bullies. KB doesn't seem to care about all that, but I do like how her visor seems like a defense mechanism. Multiple times in these episodes, she will put it down over her eyes when something scary happens. I like that detail, but KB is the one character I feel like we don't fully know yet. I'm not sure what she wants with the same clarity as the other three. We don't get a scene like we do with Fern, where we find out her mother is the undersecretary, and while she is rebellious, she is also the top of her class. That adds a lot of dimension to Fern that I feel like KB is currently missing, so I hope we get to spend some more time with her. Wim stays up too late reading stories about the Jedi, so he misses the bus and tries to take a shortcut to school, which again took me back to my own childhood of racing my bike through the woods, pretending it was indoor. Not that Wim is doing that, but I still enjoyed the feeling of it. He crashes and finds a hatch in the wood, but is discovered by safety droids before he can investigate. He meets Fern waiting for the proctor, and she starts to tease him and make up a story about how kids who miss their tests are sent to the mines. She kinda reminds me of Mouth from the Goonies. She's willing to stand up to bullies, but she's also a bit of a bully herself. Wim finds out he'll have to score perfectly in his makeup test just to pass, so honestly I understand why he would just give up on that and instead prove that he found something in the woods. He goes to find Neil, and the holiday special reference gave me a good laugh. They grab some tools and head into the woods and hilariously try to rappel into the ravine. That's such a silly little kid thing to attempt, as if they'd seen someone rappel on TV before and figured, how hard could it be? They meet up with Fern, and again she tries to scare the younger kids. The rivalry between the two groups is cute. I'm glad they aren't all just besties from the get-go. Wim and Fern seem like they're especially annoyed with one another all the time, and I like that there's some room for them to become friends and learn to respect one another. The kids get into the hatch and almost immediately accidentally lock themselves inside, first because Wim nearly pulls the lever himself until Fern stops him. Then it happens for real when Neil is started, and I'll be honest, I jumped a bit too. Of course, I still see a lot of young Luke Skywalker in Wim, his head in the clouds, convinced he's in a Jedi temple for no other reason than he wants it to be. He's excited to be exploring and on an adventure, despite being in somewhat serious danger. Again, he's a selfish kid, but he's also got some Holden from The Expanse in him. He jumps headfirst into things without thinking about the consequences. There's a great quote between Holden and another character that is simply, "There's a button. I pushed it." And the other character responds, "That's really how you go through life, isn't it?" I feel that same energy between Wim and Fern. KB wakes up the ancient ship, and Wim pushes the button. I like that the ship is upside down, suggesting a crash landing, but I don't like that Wim straight up lies to the other kids about touching the button. He gets all mad that Fern tells him to grow up, but obviously that's exactly what he needs to do. He seeks out adventure and excitement for the sake of it. He told his class he wants to be a Jedi to help people when they're in danger, but he is the danger, and not in a Walter White kind of way, just in a chaotic, bumbling way. He does things without thinking how they will affect those around him. Again, he's selfish, but that's a good starting point for a character's arc in Star Wars, since you can break down the dark side versus the light side as selfishness versus selflessness. The whole launch sequence is cool, with the ship righting itself while the kids are on the outside. Things have felt kind of inverted for us, the Star Wars audience, but now they're turning the right way up. But it's taking the kids from the familiar to the strange. They've never even seen the stars before because of the mysterious barrier that surrounds AT-ATN. The ship jumps to light speed and the first episode ends. I like how it transitioned straight into the credits, and I really enjoyed the credits music from Mick Giacchino. It felt very piratey. I think this was a solid opener, but I'm glad we got the first 2 episodes together so we could get back to the pirates and the more familiar Star Wars setting. And also the second episode is much shorter, but let's just keep going. Because things pick up right where they left off. The kids scream as they travel through hyperspace. It's interesting that they do know what hyperspace is, even though they've never even seen stars. It just adds to whatever sheltered isolation is going on with AT-ATN. The introduction of SM-33 is the most the story veers all the way into kids' fantasy for me. I think the droid is a little too easy to trick. He goes from a scary threat to a somewhat friendly ally fairly quickly. But whatever, I do like Wim's annoyance that he doesn't get to be the captain, and I like that we now have a running joke of Wim wanting to touch every button, which will definitely come back later. Maybe the rest of the kids will need him to set off the emergency hull demolition sequencer and will beg him to push it. Unfortunately, SM-33 has no idea where At-Aten is, and doesn't have any record of it in his memory, despite being crashed there for who knows how long. So he takes them to a spaceport where they could potentially find directions. Back on At-Aten, two safety droids investigate the seismic activity caused by the ship leaving, and they find Wendell. They mention starships not being permitted to come or go, another weird thing to say, and they say that breaching the barrier is a serious violation. The mystery surrounding this planet is probably the most intriguing part of the series to me so far. I also like the ET-inspired shots of the droids in the forest. On the ship, Wim still seems way too happy to be lost and surrounded by skeletons and dirt. Neil is terrified, and Wim doesn't care about his friend's feelings at all, and even blows dust in his face. I'm starting to get really frustrated with Wim, but I know that's the point. SM-33 takes them to Port Borgo, which is like the Star Wars version of Tortuga and Pirates of the Caribbean. Just pirates and their antics everywhere you look, and they're taken into port by a teak, a speedy little creature first seen in the Battle for Endor made-for-TV movie. Port Borgo is almost certainly another name for Borgo Prime, which was a base built into an asteroid, first seen in the Star Wars Legends book Young Jedi Knights Shadow Academy. It was said to be filled with people who have no conscience, thieves, murderers, creatures who would just as soon kill you as greet you. It's a cool location. I like the environment a lot, and I think it looks great. I have to imagine it was shot on the volume, but the technology is improving more and more. I think Port Borgo feels a lot bigger and more real than, say, Dayu from Obi-Wan Kenobi. Wim pays for lunch with a credit from back home, and things keep getting more interesting for At-Aten. It turns out he's holding a mint condition Old Republic credit. So At-Aten must be so isolated that they have no idea that the Old Republic was reformed into the Galactic Republic, which then fell and changed into the Galactic Empire, which was defeated and replaced with the New Republic. So how and why have they become so isolated? I think the barrier might have something to do with that. Maybe they can't get signals in or out, but there are also red dots in the sky over At-Aten that make me think it's not a natural barrier. It's like a beautiful looking disguise to hide the truth from the people who live there. The safety droids say it's a violation to go through the barrier, and they don't permit starships to come or go. I think the government might know about all the wars, and so they just closed off from the rest of the galaxy, and I guess they hid somehow. The pirates become very interested in Wim because to them, At-Aten is known as the lost planet of eternal treasure. SM-33 comes to save the kids and kick some serious pirate booty. Yes, I am proud of that stupid pun, thank you for asking. Things also swing back into violence with some pretty gnarly action. I was not expecting to see SM burn a warthog's face, but he's eventually shot and disabled, and the kids are captured. In the brig, they meet Jod, who apparently uses the Force to retrieve the key so they can all escape. That's been included in several trailers, and there's been a debate about whether or not he is truly Force-sensitive or using a trick like Haja in Obi-Wan Kenobi. Right now, I'm thinking he is truly Force-sensitive, but definitely not a Jedi. Wim, of course, thinks he is because that's what he wants to see, but Jod overheard enough of the kids' discussion to know he could use his powers to his advantage, and I think that's what he's been doing his whole life. He's probably just a Force-using pirate. Jude Law talked about how Skeleton Crew is very much a piece about working together and overcoming fears and overcoming one's opinion of oneself or one's own weaknesses in order to succeed. So I think Jod will eventually learn that it's more fulfilling to use his powers to help the kids rather than himself. Eventually. For now, I'm sure he wants to find At-Aten, because he's almost certainly Captain Silvo from the beginning, searching for that big score. But that's where these first two episodes end. Again, I think it's a decent premiere. I'm not blown away yet, but I can see the start of 4 character arcs. I hope we get to explore KB a little bit more in the very near future. I really like the mystery surrounding At-Aten and what it might mean, and the stuff with the pirates is fun. I imagine this is going to turn into a race for the supposed eternal treasure, which may or may not exist. We saw something in the trailer, but we don't know where or what that was. It all sounds like a fun adventure, but the race hasn't truly kicked off yet. This might wind up being another case of a story that could have been better suited as a movie, but it's too early to make that call just yet. For now, let me know what you thought of the premiere in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page for our video reactions and audio commentaries for every episode as they release. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.